right, so we're going to talk about 7.3, proving that a quadrilateral is a parallelogram. Can someone raise their hand and let me know what a parallelogram is? This is worth a starburst. Go for it. I mean, if you were talking to a third grader, that is correct. It looks like a slanted quadrilateral. But do you know what it is specifically?
A quadrilateral.
Parallelogram. Look at the root word. Thank you, Molly. It has two pairs of parallel sides. Okay, so let's talk about what proves a quadrilateral is a parallelogram. There are 5 things that prove a quadrilateral is a parallelogram. There were 4 properties of a parallelogram. But this is asking a 4-sided figure, is it a parallelogram? It will be a parallelogram if it has one of these 5 things as a yes. Does that make sense?
So is a square?
I haven't said them yet. We haven't learned them yet.
I thought we were saying.
Well, we're about to say them.
Is a square a parallelogram?
A square is a parallelogram. So all of the properties that we learned apply to a square, and then all of these would prove that a square is indeed a parallelogram. So look, you would show that both pairs of opposite sides are parallel. So what you have on your paper, it says opposite side and an arrow. Opposite sides are parallel. Go ahead and write that in. If it's a parallelogram, it will show the opposite sides are parallel. That's all you write. Number 2, what would prove a quadrilateral is a parallelogram is that the opposite sides are congruent. So that alone for a square, it is a 4-sided figure, and the opposite sides are congruent, because all of them are congruent. That makes a square a parallelogram. So I want you to look at these pictures and the difference between them because it matters. In this first picture, what were we given?
Arrows.
The little arrows, the little triangles. And these triangles mean that they are parallel. But in the second picture, we are given dashes, which means the sides are congruent. So you want to make sure you list the correct property with whatever picture you're given. Okay? It'll make sense in a second.
On the test, will we just assume that they're parallel?
It will tell you it's a parallelogram.
Okay.
If it's a parallelogram, it's got 4 properties, and you know them. But if it says, prove that, what theorem proves a property? What theorem proves this quadrilateral is a parallelogram? You will list one of these. Because these are the theorems that prove a 4-sided shape is a parallelogram. That the opposite sides are parallel, the opposite sides are congruent, the opposite angles are congruent. The opposite angles are congruent. Oh, okay, sorry. I don't have peripheral vision. All right, number 4 is that the opposite sides are both parallel and congruent, or congruent and parallel, however you want to write it. So if you were given a picture that showed that they were both parallel and congruent, you would write this property, that they are both parallel and congruent. But if they only show you that they're parallel, you would just say that the sides are parallel. It'll make sense when we do an assignment in a second. Promise. Yes, dear. What you wrote down yesterday were the 4 properties of a parallelogram. What we are doing right now is if there was a 4-sided shape, a quadrilateral, it would ask, is there enough to prove that it is a parallelogram? And if it had any of these 5 things, then it would be enough to prove that it's a parallelogram. So kind of, yes. But the 5th one is that diagonals bisect each other. If it shows you that the diagonals bisect each other, it is enough to prove that the quadrilateral is a parallelogram. All right, so let's talk about it. This is example 2, but whatever. For what values of x and y is quadrilateral PQRS a parallelogram? I'll put a star next to this because you're going to see a question. It's going to be a little harder than this, but you'll see it on the quiz and test. The reason I say that is we've got 4 sides that are listed. 3 of them have an x plus 9, we've got x plus 7, we've got 2x minus 1, and then we just have a y. What we want to do is figure out what equation we're going to write. We're given side lengths. If this is a parallelogram, what would we know about the sides? the opposite sides would be congruent, right? So we would know that y would be congruent to x plus 7. Does this help me solve for anything? No. So what I would want to do is look at the other two sides, which are 2x minus 1 and x plus 9. If I set up an equation where they are equal, because they should be equal, will I be able to find one of my variables? Yes. So we're going to do that first. Subtract x on both sides. 2x minus x is x minus 1 equals 9. Add 1 and x equals 10. So we found one of the variables. We want to find the other. So what do we need to do to find the value of y? Plug 10 in for x. So y equals 10 plus 7. So y equals 17. The reason I say it's going to be a little harder on the test, one of your sides was literally just y, whereas on your test it would probably be like y plus or minus something. It would be another algebraic expression instead of just one letter. Okay, but the same concept. If you're ready, you can go ahead and flip to the second page. So, the doorway shown is part of a building in England. Over time, the building has leaned sideways. Explain how you know the length of SV is equal, SV is this one, is equal to the length of TU. So, let's look at what we've got going on here. What shape is outlined in this door? A parallelogram. How do I know this is a parallelogram? Because opposite sides are parallel and the opposite sides are congruent. So that means this is a parallelogram, which means, that's how we would know. So, what we're going to do is list the property that lets us know that this is a parallelogram. So which of the 5 properties you wrote on the first page is shown in this picture? Parallel and congruent. So we're going to write that the opposite sides are parallel.
So when we're doing a question like this, it'll have both, and that's when it will write parallel
And congruent. It would have
if it
both.
only has the parallel sign, we would just write
parallel. Yeah. And if it only had the lengths, then you would just say opposite sides are congruent, depending. But it did. It had, sorry, let me finish this and I'll show you. So opposite sides are parallel and congruent, therefore it's a parallelogram. That's the answer. Anytime you see the word explain, you do need to have a sentence. Some people today have been saying opposite sides. That's not like a complete thought and it doesn't mean anything. Okay? But again, like Alana said, we wrote opposite sides are congruent and parallel. Let me see what color you can see. We said parallel because of this triangle. Shows that they're parallel. And then we said congruent because of the dash. That means that they are congruent. Do you see it well on your paper? Or is it like super gray?
It's kind of gray.
It's kind of gray. Okay. So that's why parallel and congruent. Okay? Just going to show the same thing. All right, number 4. For what value of x is quadrilateral CDEF a parallelogram? And then we're going to explain. So we are given 5x minus 8 and 3x. Are they sides, angles, or diagonals? They're diagonals. What do we know about diagonals in a parallelogram? They're bisected, which means these two halves are indeed equal to each other. Okay, so we're going to set them equal. I'm just going to tell you a common math error. What do we normally do to solve an equation? We subtract the smaller x. I feel like a lot of you wouldn't do that. It's fine either way. But if you did, does the equal sign go away? No. If I have 3 apples and I take away 3 apples, what do I have? 0 apples. Okay, so make sure if you do this step, it's fine if you don't. You got to have it equal 0. 5x minus 3x is 2x. Add the 8. 2x equals 8 and x equals 4. And then it does say explain. So our explanation is, why did we set them equal? Because, don't overthink it. Because diagonals what? Bisect each other. So remember, finish the thought. So because diagonals bisect each other. Or you could say because the diagonals cut in half. You don't have to like regurgitate the exact theorem, but. Alright, we got our last page. So this is what a question would look like. State which theorem you can use to show that the quadrilateral is a parallelogram. Okay, so number 1, okay, what are we given? We know the opposite sides are indeed parallel. Do we have anything else? Do we know anything about their length? They're both A. So they're congruent and parallel. So we're going to write opposite sides are congruent and parallel. Number 2, we're given sides, angles, or diagonals. Diagonals are lines. So we're given angles. So what is the only property that proves a quadrilateral is a parallelogram? With angles. Opposite angles are congruent, and which is true. So opposite angles are congruent. And then number 3, are these sides, angles, or diagonals? Diagonals, and we know that the diagonals are bisected. Diagonals are bisected, or the diagonals bisect each other, however you want to say that. Alright, and then the last section. These are the official theorem names. I don't make you memorize them. I make you know like what they say. So like this one says opposite sides are congruent and parallel. This one says opposite angles are congruent. And then diagonals bisect each other. So instead of writing, it's a lot. Alright, so number 4, this is similar to the homework question you had. You would want to find, we've got angles, you would want to find the relationship between the variable that is repeated. So we've got x's. Are they opposite angles or consecutive angles? Consecutive angles. So if this is a parallelogram, what do we know about consecutive angles? They add up to 180. So we're going to add them and set them equal to 180. Add them, set them equal to 180. 3x and x make 4x minus 20 plus 40 plus 20, good. Subtract 20. 4x equals 160. X equals 40. Good, so that's one of our variables. How do we find y? Plug it in for x. So which x would we like to plug it into? Yeah, because they're opposite, they're going to be congruent. So whatever this angle is, when I plug in 40, 3 times 40 is 120 minus 20 is 100. So that means 4y is going to be equal to 100 divided by 4, and y equals 25. Good. And then the last, are these sides, angles, or diagonals? Diagonals. So we know diagonals are cut in half. So 6x is going to equal 4x plus 10. Subtract 4x. 2x equals 10. So x equals 5. Good. And then the other diagonal, 2y equals y plus 1. Subtract y. Wonderful news. Perfect. All right, so what you're going to do is take out your whiteboard marker. I would just have your notes to the side. We're going to review 7.1, 2, and 3. So basically, reviewing for your quiz a little bit today. But first, we'll review what you just learned. Yes, ma'am. You're going to do 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Do them one at a time. So do 3, and then show me your answer. 4, and then show me your answer, and so on.
Oh.
All right, so in the first question, what was given to us? Opposite angles are congruent. Number 4, opposite sides are congruent. It's not congruent and parallel because it doesn't show us that they're parallel. So just opposite sides are congruent. 5, the diagonals bisect each other. 6, opposite angles are congruent. 7, congruent and parallel. And then number 8, the diagonals bisect each other. Good.